Okay, we're uh, we're already behind, and we have no hopes of catching up. And we are, like we usually are in here, spread out to the nth degree. I would foolishly ask y'all to come closer to the front because Tommy and I have gotten used to you being close to us, but I'm not that foolish this morning, so I won't ask you to do that. It is a real temptation, though, not to walk back to you, which they will not let me do. So we'll make the best of this one-time transition here, and we'll be back at our class next week, a little more joined together. We are determined to finish this course. Hopefully it's been beneficial for y'all. I know we're talking a lot of history and a lot of dates and a lot of things that you're saying, well, that's just history, it's just knowledge, it's just things for us to know, to play a game of do you know with, or something like that. Well, there's really more to it than that. There's a lot of substance here. The consistency of the message that's in the divided kingdom is important for us to understand. And it really is a really simplistic statement. It really is a simplistic thing that God wants us to understand. And it is that God is in control and that man lacks understanding to fully appreciate that. And so man goes off on his own ways, using his own methods to enhance his stature instead of God's. And God always punishes man for doing that. And God uses individuals and peoples and nations that are even worse than mankind in many ways to inflict that punishment, knowing that over God's time, those people will also be punished as well. To me, that's really kind of the summary of of this period of history, of this period, and what we really need to take from it. You know, as human beings, we're impatient. We're impatient for God to come. We're impatient for God to punish our enemies, as Ryan was talking about somewhat today. We're just impatient people. We have to understand that God's righteousness is unveiled over a much longer history than our lifespans. That what we see now, God will correct. That's not the last bail. That God takes His time to deliver blessings and to deliver punishment. So we have to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. It's not so much about the dates and the people, but it's about the consistency of God dealing with mankind. So with that said, we are really going to try, probably without much success, Tommy, to get to the end of actually to the four last kings of Judah today. We're going to look at the first four there. Tommy will pick up with the last four, which are really inconsequential kings and can be talked about in maybe about 5 minutes as he then leads us into the big effect of Babylonian captivity next week. There we go. We do have the pleasure, though, of talking about a really good king, King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was king over Judah beginning in 728, about 6 years before the period that Tommy took us to last week, that is the fall of the nation of Israel in 722. He succeeded his father Ahaz. and he was the 12th of the king. We're talking about more than 30 individuals here collectively during this time period that have had an opportunity to lead Israel to God in a united fashion, and yet do not see or seize the opportunity to do that. Hezekiah's a little bit different. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 29 years, and that's a pretty long period of reigning as king, particularly during this time when we've seen some that simply didn't last more than a couple of months in some cases. Hezekiah is a unique individual, and if you mention Hezekiah's name, most of us would have a positive response to that name. And it was simply because he was a man that exhibited faith in God. It's said of him that he trusted in Jehovah, the God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him. He stands out singularly as a king of Judah that represented God in everything that he did. It's also said in other places, he did that which was right in the sight of Jehovah, according to all that David his father had done. So finally, Judah has the promise of a king that believes firmly and deeply in Jehovah and is willing to undertake some reforms. Hezekiah actually led Judah back as close as Judah ever got to God again during this period before the captivity. In the first month of his reign, he actually ordered that the temple, which had been desecrated, had been left for neglect, had actually been almost abandoned in many ways except for commercial reasons. He ordered that it be repaired, rebuilt, and he had a cleansing of the temple so that it was pure in God's sight again to sustain worship in. Another thing that he did, he destroyed all the idols of worship that had arisen under his father Ahaz and all the other previous kings of Israel and Judah. He destroyed all of them. I find it a little bit interesting that he did not destroy, that is, break into pieces and grind up and throw away the brazen serpent Moses had raised in the wilderness because of the respect that he had for the story that it told about his people. Now, it had become misused in the worship in the daily lives of the people of Judah, but he respected the history that it represented. And you know, that's a lesson for us sometimes, that we need to respect history. That's why we're talking about this, because it teaches us things that are important to us today for the future of our families. Now, another thing that Hezekiah did that was of significance to bring the nation of Judah back to God was to reinstitute the Passover. It had not been observed for many years for reasons that are obvious, idol worship, and so he instituted a call across all of the geography of both Israel, the old Israel kingdom, those who were now in captivity, and through Judah. Some of the people had not been led into captivity at this point. Some of them had escaped from that captivity. And so we see that this call collected people from some of the lost 10 tribes of Israel to come to Judah. So people from the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, even from Issachar and Zebulun and Asher, people who were displaced, who had no home, they came to Judah under Hezekiah's leadership to worship again. And so those two or three things say that we now have a king that is willing to lead the people in the right way. And that's why these things are so positive about Hezekiah. Now, there's no doubt that every king in this time period was involved with massive battles on every front. We've talked about battle after battle after battle, and the collections of people are never consistently the same. One nation will fight another nation in alliance with a third nation, and before you know it, the first two are fighting the third one. And it even happens within families in terms of leadership. And so Hezekiah's time was not any different. He actually beat back the Philistines into Gaza through a great slaughter. Now, during this time, because of Hezekiah's leadership, the national pride, if you will, and I know we talked a little bit about nationalism today, the national pride of Judah at this time gave them an authority, a presence in the world at that time that they could wage these battles successfully. And we know that the Philistines have been enemies of both Israel and Judah for centuries, actually. And Hezekiah is one who pushed them back into the area that we know south of Gaza today in that Mediterranean area. And that was because Hezekiah trusted in God to be his leader. He didn't trust in his army. He didn't trust in the power that he had. He didn't trust in his alliance with the king of Assyria. He did not trust anyone but Lord. And that gave national promise to the people. It gave prominence to the nation of Judah, trusting God's protection. In fact, it led so much to that belief in God that Hezekiah took this opportunity of national pride and strength and wealth to refuse to pay tribute to the king of Assyria, which his father had begun paying years before him, and he just stopped. And that was a marvelous decision on Hezekiah's part that talks to us today about moral strength making decisions in our lives today. If King Hoshea had exhibited the same kind of dependency on God as Hezekiah did, it may be that Israel and Judah could have reconciled and both nations would have been saved. It takes strength to have moral courage, and that's what Hezekiah exhibited here as he walked through his faith with God. Now, that's a little bit of speculation, but you know, there comes those times in our lives when we have to make decisions that have long-lasting effects. And Hoshea didn't stand up to the king of Assyria and wound up in bondage to the Assyrians because of that. Hezekiah led a much different life. Now, I hope you can see that map better than I can. But I want to continue to share with you the fact that geography is important. And the geography, and I'm going to use this screen over here. I think this will show up over there. There are some things that you just need to continually understand, that this is a relatively small area that we're discussing in the Bible in this particular time. There are things going on over here to the east, and there are things going on over here to the northwest, but most of the Bible centers on the activity in this relatively confined area. I want you to remember these places as we talk through a few things this morning. I want you to remember the Scythians up here. This area, this is the Caspian Sea, just east of the Black Sea. They are important because they enter into battle with Assyria and with other nations. For a reference point, this is Ur, from which Abraham came. And this is not, there we go. It is important to know that this is Lower Egypt, not Upper Egypt. That the area around the Mediterranean Sea is the lower part of Egypt, and when we talk about the Upper Egypt, it's the area down here toward the land of Cush, or the land that we know as Ethiopia. And one other place that is in this general area here is Carchemish, which has an important battle in the future of the Assyrian kingdom and Judah's captivity and the resurgence of Egypt as a power. Nothing is consistent in this geographical alignment of nations. Nothing stays the same. The lines are always being redrawn as evidenced by the different colors here, and that's what leads to the continual warfare. Israel, which is right here, just this little bitty piece of land right here, just happens to be caught in the middle of all this. It's really almost by happenstance that Israel is involved in this history at all, except for God's presence. People from all of these areas are coming to take Egypt. Egypt's going northeast to take Assyria and Babylon. Later on, the Medes and the Persians from this area will come westward into this area. So you have to understand the geography here to know the challenges that some of these kings faced, and for which they make decisions sometimes which are not godly decisions. I wish we could keep this up because we continually refer to this today in different ways. Now, as Israel falls in 722 and Hezekiah is on the throne in Judah as of 728, there's kind of a lapse in the biblical narrative of what's going on in this region. There's not a lot of details about what happens here, and so we have to turn to secular writings to understand about a 20-year period here before we get to about 701, 702 in that time period. And so we're grateful to Josephus, we're grateful to Sargon II, to Shalmaneser for their inscriptions, which have been uncovered by archaeologists that tell the stories that mention biblical names in their scrolls, in their monuments, in their reliefs, and in their drawings to fill in this particular time period. And we know that Shalmaneser was, during the time of the fall of Israel, king of Assyria, and was responsible for that takeover, except that he died almost at the very end. At the time that Israel collapsed, he died. But he was not only involved in warfare with Israel, he was involved in warfare with Tyre and Sidon here. And he had besieged that complex or that area for a number of years. And so that's important for us to put in context as we continue to go forward with this. Sargon II, who succeeded Shalmaneser in Assyria, and again, we're wanting to understand the context around Judah, was a very good king from the Assyrian standpoint, and he was a strong king. He was constantly in battle, but he had his own problems in the region. If you remember the map, right under Assyria, right in the belly of Assyria, if you will, was Babylon. And Babylon was a subservient nation to Assyria, but had their own independence. Remember, that's one of the tactics that conquering countries used to use. They would leave certain people amount of independence that they had conquered. And they had done that in other areas and in Babylon. And Babylon actually remained as an independent force against Assyria until about 710. Sargon also came down through Israel and fought the Egyptians and the Philistines in 720, just as the kingdom of Judah was by itself. In 717, he defeated the Hittites, which, if you go back to the map, were in the upper left-hand corner, a nation that had continually assaulted Israel and Assyria and others. He defeated them at Carchemish, and that makes that battle in 717 important for us today. Now, also in Babylon, there had arisen an individual by the name of Marduk that was important. He has a longer name, Marduk Baladan. He's mentioned in 2 Kings, the 20th chapter, as being the king or the ruler over Babylon. And he's the one that allowed it to be successful up until about 710. He actually has two periods of reign. One that ends in about 708, but it's in this time period that we're talking about is his first one. And then he goes away for a while, and then he comes back for a much shorter reign, about 701 or 702, and then he disappears completely from the historical record. But he's important because it was the Babylonians that were afflicting the Assyrians, while the Assyrians were afflicting other people, including Judah. So in 712 BC, the king of Babylon, that would have been Merodach. He knows that in the long run, he's not going to win the battle for geography of this area against Assyria. And he sees the success that Hezekiah is having in Judah. And so he goes down to form, to make an embassy, if you will, to have a relationship with Hezekiah. And we'll come back to that visit in a moment when we talk about the one mistake that Hezekiah makes. So, but he wants Hezekiah's wealth, he wants Hezekiah's army, he wants Hezekiah's God, he wants Hezekiah's strength to help him stay in power in Babylonia and fight the Assyrians. And so Judah gets into this, if you will, unholy alliance with Babylon, thinking that Babylon is their friend. And we know that later on that proves not to be true. In 711 BC, Sargon took over Babylon, and Marduk was chased out of the country, actually went down toward the land of Ur and lived in the wadis down there along the Caspian Sea and in that area. But he didn't go away. He'll make a reappearance. Sargon, here's the challenge, and we think royal palace intrigue is interesting today. It can never be any more interesting than it was in this particular time, because Sargon, after having all these successes and winning over Babylon, he was actually murdered by his son Sennacherib in 705. Now we know Sennacherib was a very, very cruel king. He didn't have much of a conscience. He had a lot of power. He had a lot of wealth. He was a very capable administrator, but he was a cruel person. And he was able actually to take many of the cities of Judea from Hezekiah in battle. And so in some regards, in many regards, he was very successful in dealing with Judah, against Judah, and capturing the land and bringing idolatry, if you will, back into the land that Hezekiah was trying to revert back to God. And the people were somewhat resistant to Hezekiah's leadership. You know, the character of a group of people, the character of a nation, the character of anything really doesn't always rest exclusively in its leadership. It's the people. It's the people that gives character to any organization, any nation, any group of people. It's not necessarily or exclusively the leadership that does that. And Hezekiah was having his own problems getting the people of Israel to return to God. And so that was an opportunity for Sargon. It was an opportunity for Sennacherib to exploit that. And in many cases, the people of Israel, or the people of Judah, were satisfied with Assyria taking over because they saw prosperity there, among other things. Well, Sennacherib took over these other cities of Judah with the exception of Jerusalem. He was not allowed to approach Jerusalem even at this particular time. And so because of that, he was satisfied with what he had already gained in geography and in power and expansion of his kingdom. And instead of pursuing Jerusalem, he went back to Assyria, went back to his home. In victory, more wealthy, more powerful than he had been when he left. And you know, Judah was not Sennacherib's major enemy. Neither were the Babylonians. Neither were the Scythians. Neither were the rising power of the Medes in this area, and later on the Persians. The greatest power or the greatest threat to Sennacherib was really Egypt. And once again, Judah, Israel as a whole, finds itself caught between two powers, each of whom wants the other's land. They're just right in the middle. And they have really nowhere to go. The Mediterranean Sea is on the west, the mountain range is on the east, and the two powers are on the north and south of them. So all they can do is hope for peaceful coexistence with either or both of those particular kingdoms, because they're going to have to allow them to move through Judah with their armies in many of these battles. It's not unlike Moses leading Israel out of Egyptian captivity and wandering in the wilderness. He had to ask for permission to cross through certain lands that God had not yet given them to get to the land of Canaan, didn't he? There's a consistency. There's a consistency to this process. And so we'll skip a lot of detail here, but Isaiah makes a prominent entrance in this particular point in time. And he had warned Hezekiah very strongly not to make an alliance with Egypt, because Egypt would not defend them against Assyria. They actually would turn on Judah later on. And so we read about that in Isaiah, the 30th chapter, his conversation with Hezekiah relative to this. Assyria did eventually take Egypt, and for a while ruled over it for several decades, actually. That came to an end in about the middle of the 600s, when the Ethiopians really came forth in prominence in Egypt and ran the Assyrians. Well, they didn't really run the Assyrians out. The Assyrians grew complacent, and the Ethiopians really reestablished a dynasty in Egypt. Interesting that during this particular time, Hezekiah becomes mortally ill with a boil or carbuncle. Now, I don't know if anybody in here has ever had a real boil or a carbuncle, but you usually don't think of them as being fatal, but they can be extremely painful and disabling. And that we're not going to go into all of that, but he was afflicted with this. And in fact, because of something that he had done previously, God sends Isaiah to him to tell him that he's going to die. And the reason that he's going to die is because when Merodach came from Babylonia to form the alliance, Hezekiah's wealth was so great that he demonstrated to Merodach that with great prominence, he was proud of what he had done and hadn't given God the glory. And so we are very careful here to see that even though Hezekiah was a strong leader, and many will say later that Hezekiah's reformation of Judah, bringing them back to God, was 2 miles wide and 2 feet deep. It didn't really get down to the people. It really didn't get down into the depth of the people. But for whatever reason, he was wealthy, he was prominent, he was glorified, and Merodach, he was willing to show off his wealth and power to Merodach. And so that plays into the rest of Hezekiah's life. When Isaiah comes to Hezekiah with this mortal illness that he has and tells him that he's going to die, Hezekiah responds in a way that I don't know whether it's unusual or not, but he was distraught and he wept bitterly and he prayed. In fact, in Isaiah 38 it says he turned his face to the wall and prayed and wept sorely. Pretty intense prayer. And you know what happened? God heard his prayer. And Isaiah, by the time Hezekiah was praying, had left his presence. And on the way, God comes to Isaiah and says, go back to Hezekiah and tell him basically that he will die, but it won't be now. And he'll be able to go to the temple that he's repaired, that he's refurbished, that he's brought the priest in, that he's cleansed and purified. That's what Hezekiah wanted to do, was to worship in the temple, and he would be allowed to do that before his death would come. And so, as was the custom of the day, Hezekiah asked for a sign. You remember what the sign was? Yeah, it's on the screen. The shadow of the sundial of Ahaz in the courtyard went back 10 degrees, showing additional time was added to Hezekiah's life so that he could go to the temple and worship, so they could continue to lead the people of Judah back to God as God had promised him in response to his weeping and to his prayer. The misjudgment there refers to what I was just describing with his relationship with Merodach. Isaiah told him that, be wary though, this alliance that you formed is not what you think it is. Babylonia will eventually turn on you and you will be taken into captivity. The nation of Judah will be taken into captivity, not by the Assyrians, but by the Babylonians, who you just signed an alliance with to protect them from the Assyrians. So there's all kinds of intrigue here. We think we live in a world full of dishonesty and intrigue and backstabbing and what goes on in the smoke-filled back rooms and all that sort of thing. Well, it's nothing to compare with what's going on here. Sargon is succeeded, as we said earlier, by Sennacherib, who crushes the revolt of Babylon. Then he turned back to Egypt and Judah, and Judah allied with this forbidden enemies, in this case Egypt, rather than depending on God. And this is where Hezekiah could have demonstrated more leadership. Hezekiah did choose dependence on God, but he could have been more forceful in that. He could have been more prominent in that. Encouraged by Isaiah, he committed his own and his people's safety to Jehovah, who wrought for them a deliverance as a signal of the destruction of Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea. And so military intrigue, political intrigue, all kinds of things are going on here at this particular time. There are conversations that are occurring between Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and Hezekiah at this time. We won't go in. There's a lot of detail. There's a really interesting story around this time period, but we won't go into that. Let us suffice it to say that God allowed Assyria to assail Judah, that there was a lot of brashness and arrogance in the Assyrian attack on Judah, and they had a lot of confidence that they were going to take Jerusalem. But it didn't turn out that way. God showed a sign to the Judeans and to Hezekiah, because as Sennacherib was going back home to Assyria, he began to hear rumors that another king from the south was coming to take Egypt and to take Assyria away from him. And so he's distracted by this rumor that he's hearing. And so he had conquered 2 more cities on his way back in Judah, on his way back to Assyria. And in this conversation that occurred between Sennacherib and Hezekiah, there was an exchange of letters. And they were very nasty, ugly letters about the power that Assyria possessed to take over Judah. And so what did Hezekiah do? Putting his dependency on God, he spread the letter in the temple, and God gave a sign. In one night, on the way back, 185,000 Assyrians were killed by the angel of God as a sign to Hezekiah. There's not a lot written about this. There's not a lot said about this. It just happened, and Sennacherib continued to go on back home. In fact, it probably was demoralizing for him. He didn't tell the people in Assyria about the nature of what had happened, but he did return to Assyria, and there he was slain as Isaiah had foretold many years before. And that is a Baal right there. He's succeeded by his third son, Hadon, one of the most powerful of the Assyrian monarchs who ruled in 681 to 669. He was also a battle-weary, battle-hardened king. And so we see Hezekiah becoming, during his last days, extremely wealthy and very popular. He dies in 698, and Hezekiah is buried in the place of greatest honor among the sepulchres of the kings. And so that's probably as good a stopping point. And Tommy, you and I are not going to get to the Babylonian captivity, and I'm not sure which one of us will be here next week to continue this enthralling story of battle and betrayal. But one of us will be, because we are getting to the last kings of Judah, as is indicated here, and that Hezekiah is succeeded by his son Manasseh, and Manasseh doesn't really stand out very much. But we'll pick up with Manasseh next week and look at the last 75 years or so of the kingdom of Judea before it's taken into Babylonian captivity. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your attention. We'll be back in the fellowship hall next week.